Hey, this is Chris with Phoenix Gaming. Today we're going to talk about Old World. It's a more modern take on a Games Workshop classic, Warhammer Fantasy. So if ranking and flanking is as exciting as sorting and boarding, keep watching because this is going to be the first in a series on Old World and doing a deep dive. Before we dig in, one thing I do want to say, this is going to be an ongoing series and I am going to be adhering to a much tighter schedule now. I may not post every week, but I will have a structure and it will be Old World, AOS, Middle Earth, 40K. We will rotate those four and then we will sprinkle in other games as we do. But so everybody knows what to expect. If an Old World video just came out, then the next one coming out is going to be AOS and so on. Just wanted to make sure I said that so everybody knew what to expect coming from me. We're going to be doing a lot more content creation again. I had to take some time off for some personal stuff, but we're ready to dig back in, and we're going to start with Old World. And we're going to start by talking about what it is, what it isn't, and just getting an overall feel for the game. And then we'll do a big rules breakdown on each phase, etc. What is Old World? Old World's a grim dark fantasy game. I guess it's kind of grim dark. It checks that box. And it's set in Games Workshop's Warhammer Fantasy universe. It features rank and file formations, epic heroes, destructive magic, and square bases. If you're familiar with other GW games, there are concepts that you're going to find very familiar. And despite Old World being a relatively new game, really all it is a re-release of Warhammer Fantasy. So many of the modern systems that you actually see in AOS and 40K take roots in Old World because of Old World being a continuation of fantasy. One of those big things that I see, because I played a lot of fantasy, is the fact that AP modifies saves. That's not how old 40K used to work, and then starting in 8th Ed, they adopted a more Warhammer Fantasy style system and have kept that ever since. I would consider Old World to be a pretty dense game. It implements a more literal movement system as opposed to a more abstract one. Units have to wheel, pivot, sidestep. You have to account for all of that with your movement. Each formation has its own line of sight. It's a little, arc that comes out of the front of the formation. And then facing does matter because you're in a formation. So really, at its heart, Old World is a game about movement and positioning more than it is about rules and gotchas. And I'd like to talk about some of Old World's strengths and weaknesses. And I want to start with the weaknesses. I'd like to tear it down before we build it up. I like to end things on a positive note. Part of that's probably from my time in management when I was back with Sprint and other corporations. So we're going to start with the weaknesses. Number one, the rules can be a bit dense and sometimes they can feel a little overcomplicated. There's a lot of rules, especially universal special rules. It's basically impossible to memorize them all. The game itself is not hard. It's very straightforward, and honestly, 60 to 70% of the time, you're not going to run into too many issues. But that other 30 to 40%, you're going to get into some weird situation where the rules seem a little muddy or unclear. And that's just because of the way the game's structured and because of how many USRs or Universal Special Rules there are. There are some rules in the game that can feel a little dated or they can kind of feel janky or gamey. One example I like to use for that is the challenge system. Challenges to me are a great example of a dated rule structure or system. And honestly, again, in most situations, they're not a hindrance. But because of how they interact, there can be situations where they can interrupt the flow of the game and they can break the immersion or the suspension of disbelief that you build up as you visualize this battle in your mind. And I don't think that these rules or challenges, either one, need to go, but I think they could use a little bit of a refinement or a tweak. Movement trays do make the game easier. This is a weakness, believe it or not, because it's just another in the list of things you want to have in order to play the game. You don't need movement trays, but they make the game a lot easier and they make it go a lot quicker. Otherwise, you're having to try to scoot or move formations one model at a time, and because they move in a formation, it's just easier to have a tray, even if it's just a piece of cardboard that you set your models on and just push around on the table. Add to that list wheeling tools, line of sight templates, and all sorts of other things, blast templates, flame templates. You have countless widgets and tools, most of which are very useful, but not necessary. And it's just another thing to carry with you when you go to play games. So that to me is a bit of a weakness, because you almost need like a tackle box or a toolbox just for your gaming accessories. I will say this last thing I'm going to put on the weakness list is both a strength and a weakness, and that's why it's last on the list. And that's the list building system. I think it is very dense, and that might not be for everybody, and I could see how that would be a weakness. For me and what I want out of Old World, I find it to be a strength. I like the army structure rules, where you're capped at a certain percentage of your army can be X, a certain percentage of your army can be Y, and then even beyond that, certain units also have a restriction on how many you can bring. An example of this is maybe up to 25% of your points can be rare, but maybe you have a rare unit that you're limited to 1 per army, for example, or 1 per 1,000 points. So it does a very good job of preventing spam of the things that are supposed to be big and scary and strong. And what that does is that allows those things to be big and scary and strong because they can't be spammed. In addition, every model has a points cost. It's not going to be like 40K or AOS where you're buying a squad or you're buying a squad and a half, etc. Every model has a point cost. Every piece of war gear has a point cost. There's a lot of nuts and bolts to the game. If you're looking for a more streamlined and faster playing game, Old World isn't it. And that's when, like I said, the list building becomes a weakness. If you're looking for something that almost feels like a role-playing game, but with mass battles in mind, then this is it. This is the game for you. Is your elven noble riding a great warhawk or a forest dragon, or is he just on foot? Should he take the spear or sword? If you want to have near complete control over what goes into your army, then this is it. This is the game for you. Now we're going to talk about the full-on strengths of Old World. Number one, the game plays a lot faster than most people realize. There's not a lot of reliable shooting throughout the game. And I know in the comments, somebody's going to be like, well, this army and this army. Yeah, okay, I get it. There's fucking exceptions. I understand. But the game's not balanced around shooting. And even some of the more reliable armies with shooting don't shoot that well because bows are not extremely strong. And because a lot of shooting is predicated around bows. A lot of armies have archers. They're not the best. So a lack of reliable shooting throughout most of the game means that, turns 1 and 2 are usually about moving, getting into position, setting up for turn 3, 4, 5, etc. Shooting phases do exist. They go a lot faster because you don't have, and I'm not picking on Tau, but you don't have a Tau-like army where it's like, okay, well, this is the only phase I really interact in, and because of that, I'm going to have like a 10-minute shooting phase. You might have a few units shooting, you might have some spells to cast, but overall, shooting phases are going to be a lot quicker. And all the other phases are going to be pretty similar in time when you compare it to games like AOS or 40K. Movement trays, again, do speed up the movement phase. And again, that's where you want them. Because if I've got 120 models on the board, but they're broken up into 10 units, if I've got movement trays, I'm only moving 10 units. I'm not moving 120 models. And again, I am, but you understand what I'm saying. You almost are moving 10 models because they're all on one big base instead of a bunch of little bases. And honestly, where the game can get, I don't want to say bogged down, but where it does kind of slow down or can get stagnant is the fight phase. And there's a couple reasons for that. Fight phases are completely shared. Both players get to interact, which does keep the game much more engaging. But in addition to that, fight phases are the most complicated part of the game because of things like combat resolution and stuff like that. So fight phases are typically going to be where you're going to be looking up the most rules and things like that, in addition to the fact that both players play in every fight phase. going to back to the time thing, 40K tournaments, you can 3,000 or at a 40K tournament, you're going to have around 3 hours, maybe 315 for a 2,000 point game. Old World, if both players are on the ball and know their shit, could probably do the same points at about a 2 to 2.5 hour round time frame. And that's not saying two good players could play at that duration. That's saying you could set that time limit at a tournament. And I think most even average players, as long as they're not dawdling, could get their games done. Another strength of Old World, factions have very strong identities without leading to horrific imbalances. GW's rules team does a great job of making sure each army feels distinct without needlessly bloating the rules. The USR system works very well and could really be a blueprint for how other games could be made, and it is the direction a lot of their games have gone and are going. If I were to rank Games Workshop games on a scale of like best to worst, I would put Old World in the top 3. It is not number 1, and it could be number 2. I think it fights for number 2. Because to me, Middle Earth is number 1, and it's not even close. I don't get to play it very often, but it's a very tight rule system. It's very clean. It's very intuitive, and it's pretty interactive without feeling like you have to have an encyclopedic knowledge of the game to prevent gotchas. And then that number 2 spot, I could say, is Old World or Blood Bowl. They're very different games, so it's hard for me to be definitive on, well, Blood Bowl's better, Old World's better. I think it's more like a 2A, 2B situation. But top 3 games, Old World is in there for sure. And now we're going to talk about why I think it stands out. Why does it rank so high to me? It's well balanced despite having such strong faction identity. It hasn't been re-released long enough for GW to just kind of fuck it up with all their constant tinkering and updates. I'm looking at you, 40K. The Old World community is honestly one of the best and nicest communities of any GW game I've ever played in. I've been to a few Old World tournaments, and, the community's been very welcoming to me. They've been very welcoming to my daughter. Everybody's very cool. I've had a couple of bad interactions, but that wasn't a shitty person. That was just a personality conflict. That wasn't their fault. That wasn't my fault. We just had personalities that clashed. And that happens. You're never going to just be like 100% get along with everybody. But that being said, no big issues, no big fights. I've had a lot more issues at 40K tournaments with regard to tryhards and people just being shitty than I've ever had at an Old World event. And I would say it ranks right up there with AOS. AOS has got another very welcoming and warm community, at least locally for me. So it ranks right up there with AOS for me. Both of those games have a very good community. And overall, I think you should play Old World if you want a deep tactical game that relies more on player skill expression than list building and meta hopping. It does have some shortcomings. They're very few, and they're usually overshadowed by its strengths. I think Old World's a fantastic game. It is not trying to be something that it isn't. It is trying to be a pseudo role-playing game with mass battles in mind, and if that's what you're looking for, it's awesome, and you should definitely check it out. That being said, I want to remind everybody this is going to be an ongoing series. We've just done an overview of what Old World is. Then we're going to do a turn structure, and we're going to break down each phase. I started to do this when the game first launched, and I'm going to be honest with everybody. The last couple years of my life have been very difficult. My daughter has had a lot of personal and health issues. Obviously, a lot of you know the history behind my son, which is why I'm so touch and go. Sometimes I'm cranking out videos and sometimes I'm not. We are going to try to stick to this schedule. And so in 4 weeks, we'll have another Old World video, and I'm going to stagger them like that. So thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.